Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
And from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 276, On the Road with Erik Deckers.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Hello and welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, are you ready to get on the road?
I am I'm absolutely ready to get on the road. I've got my driving shoes on, my goggles. I rolled down my isinglass windows. I'm all set.
Now, On the Road, that was the famous TV author Charles Kerouac, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, no, wait.
Yes.
That's Jack Kerouac, the author, yes. Well,
it was Charles Kerouac, too. Went around the country in an RV.
That's right, in a Winnebago.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you're going to see that humor plays a role in this episode, and not without reason. Our guest today is a name that should be familiar to listeners of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, who not only does he contribute to our Canonical Couplets, but he is also a humor columnist and a published author. And we're going to be talking with him about those elements, about how that intersects with Sherlock Holmes, and what we have to expect from him with respect to Sherlock Holmes and writing in the future. So you want to stay tuned for this. The show notes for this episode are available at ihose.co/ihose276, or of course at ihearofsherlock.com. If you go there, you can sign up for email updates, and you can find the button to support us on Patreon, or just go to patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. Either way, you will be in good stead. All of our Patreon supporters are eligible to listen to the show ad-free. And you can do that not only on Patreon, but you can connect your Spotify account to it as well and listen through there. Hear us ad-free on Spotify. So, we would love to have you as part of the community there. We have gifts at various levels, and we have interactions with fans, a whole community being developed on Patreon. We'd love to have you as part of that. And of course, we thank you if you already are a part of it. Erik Deckers has been a professional blogger and ghostwriter since 2009. He's the co-author of Branding Yourself, No Bullshit Social Media, and The Owned Media Doctrine. He published his first humor novel, Mackinac Island Nation, in 2019. Erik has been blogging since 1997 and a newspaper humor columnist since 1994. He's written several radio and stage plays and numerous business articles. Erik was in the spring 2016 writer-in-residence at the Jack Kerouac House in Orlando, Florida, and is now the president of their board of directors. And of course, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere listeners know Erik for his witty repartee in the Canonical Couplet responses. Erik Deckers, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Hi, thank you.
Well, you are definitely a household name around these parts. I would imagine you're a household name around your own house, too, which is a good thing. But for the purposes of our show here, why don't we talk about how you first got wind of Sherlock Holmes?
Actually, it goes all the way back to the 6th grade. When my first story I ever read was in a school reader, and it was The Dying Detective of all the stories. And I always thought Sherlock Holmes was one of those things that we just sort of have in our general consciousness. The name Sherlock Holmes had always been there, but we never watched the shows or anything like that in my house. But I read The Dying Detective, and I realized that this is more than just a person. And then I discovered that there were other stories, and I realized that this is based on a series of stories and books that I could actually read. And so I think it was in middle school that I finally started reading them.
And The Dying Detective, of all stories, that's not your average beginning. No,
it was when I realized sort of where it was in the canon and some of the, quote, more important stories. I was surprised that was the one that I had discovered, but for whatever reason, that publisher had decided to put that in there.
Interesting. What else were you reading? Well, when did you finally get through the canon and read all the stories?
I think I got through them in high school. My father had given me the full illustrated set, or not the illustrated set, but the complete 2-volume set. And so it was around my junior or senior year in high school that I decided to just plow through them all and read all of them.
Oh, so 2-volume, you mean the annotated? Did you have an annotated?
No, it was
the Doubleday?
I think it was the Doubleday version. I think I still have them, in fact.
Interesting. So what else? So were you a big reader in those days?
Yeah, absolutely. I would read just about everything. And of course, keep in mind, I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, so I was reading whatever was available to me then, a lot of science fiction and fantasy. I read some Agatha Christie. I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. In fact, in the 6th grade, I tried to get through The Hobbit, and it was such a slog. I made it 13 pages into it and quit for 3 years and didn't read it again until high school. When I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, and all my friends were just raving about this book, and so I thought, well, I'm going to read it too. And so I forced myself through the tough part, and then it just opened up a whole new world of swords and sorcery to me. And so then I just started reading all kinds of different fantasy and science fiction books. And ever since then, I've just been a regular reader, and I read constantly.
Were you an Asimov fan by any chance?
I wasn't. I read a couple of his stories, but it never grabbed me in the same way that swords and sorcery fantasy stuff did.
So who's a favorite author from that genre?
Fritz Lieber and De Camp, the Conan series. In fact, I've got a collection of the paperbacks that I have owned for decades that I can see from where I'm sitting right now.
And it's interesting. I mean, you think about some of the writers that we know who are or were Sherlockians who were also science fiction writers. I'm thinking of I mentioned Asimov. Paul Anderson is in that kind of strata as well. Mm-hmm. But have you seen any interesting stories to you as a fan of sci-fi and fantasy where Sherlock Holmes makes the crossover?
Honestly, the most interesting one to me in that was the Batman and Sherlock Holmes kind of crossover. That was always an interesting one, that somebody would make that leap. Or what was it, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, when Holmes and Watson made an appearance at the very, very end of that graphic novel. Or even Arsène Lupin, the French thief. He went up against Sherlock Holmes a few times, although Conan Doyle didn't actually like the appearance of Holmes in the Lupin stories, and so the author had to change the name, but it was still clearly Sherlock Holmes. So those are kind of the three that have always stuck out to me.
Yeah, those are great examples, and there were the straight Batman Sherlock Holmes crossovers. One that was it wasn't exactly a crossover, but you've probably read it and seen it. It is Gotham by Gaslight, where Bruce Wayne is placed in 1880s Gotham City. And it feels like Sherlock Holmes could be around the corner in any one of those instances.
I will have to check that out.
Yeah, highly recommend it. I think it's part of, if you want to watch an animated version of it, it's part of the DC family of films on Max. Well, talk to us a little bit about how you got the writing bug. I mean, obviously, being a voracious reader, as many of us were in the 70s and 80s, growing up in that era, back before there were all of these other distractions. It was a wonderful time to be growing up and be surrounded by so much printed material. But how did you find your way into writing as part of your career?
Well, I can almost remember the book that inspired it. There was a book, I think it was called How to Improve Your Writing, or How to Be a Writer. And it was just this kid's book on different lessons and things you should know to be a writer. And I remember Kurt Vonnegut was in there. And I had, again, one of those names that I'd always heard but never knew who it was. And he talked about being merciless about editing yourself. And it was just this small, thin book, no more than 80 pages. But it was different articles about all these writers. And so I always thought that would be interesting to do. I wonder how I do that. And then I kind of forgot about it. But then I think it was my sophomore or junior year in high school, and I grew up in Muncie, Indiana, and I'm walking past one of the college bookstores, and they had a poster in the window for Banned Books Week. And it listed some of the different books that had been banned in the past throughout the United States. And I was the kind of kid who, if you didn't want me to do something, you should never tell me not to do it.
Well, there's nothing like a good banned books list for compiling a library, right?
Exactly. And I saw this and I thought, oh, these are books Erik's not supposed to read. Guess what Erik's going to do? And so I went to the library, and I think I even went to the bookstore and bought Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Breakfast of Champions, and Catch-22. And read Catch-22 when I was 15. Not necessarily a book you recommend to a 15-year-old, but I read it and loved it. And then read Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut, who is from Indianapolis, and then read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I realized I enjoyed what I had been reading. I enjoyed reading satire. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to write satire. I want to make fun of people in power. And I want to swear in books. And so, and again, then I just kind of forgot about it. I forgot this is what I want to do. And so it's not like I ever took steps that I was going to be a writer. But when I was in college, attending Ball State University, I started writing for the school newspaper and found that I was good at it. And so it was around college that I actually started thinking there might be something to this. And so when I went into marketing as a profession, I made sure that writing was all a part of it. And from there, thanks to the support and just belief of my wife, I started expanding and doing all of these other different things. She said, you might be able to do this. I think you could do that. And So I would do things like I started writing radio theater and audio drama, and I wrote a few books, some social media marketing books, and that's, Scott, that's how you and I met, was in the social media world. And then finally wrote and published my first novel in 2019, which I had started in 2015. And then I republished it with an actual publisher this year, and I just submitted to them my second novel a few months ago. So, just all along the way, everything that I've been doing has always been about writing, because that's what I love to do. And it just, my career became such that it became my day job, but it also became my sideline with ghostwriting books, and then a hobby with writing a newspaper humor column for the last 28 years, and then writing novels as well.
Well, tell us a little bit about the first novel. That was Mackinac Island Nation, wasn't it?
Close. Mackinac Island Nation.
Island.
It's French, and apparently the French people have a different pronunciation for everything, and so it's spelled Mackinac, but it's pronounced Mackinac. And the premise was, what if Mackinac Island were forced to secede from the United States because of a 200-year-old peace treaty, and Congress took 2 years to bring it back? And I'd had that idea, I think, since the late 90s, when my wife and I would go visit Mackinac Island for vacation. And I always thought, what would happen if that happened? And so in 2015, I started writing that, finally, about 18 years later, and turned that into my first novel. But I wrote that novel while I was a resident at the Jack Kerouac House here in Orlando, which is a year-round writer's residency. And I was the spring 2016 resident, and I got in on the strength of that first chapter, and worked on it while I was there, and then just kind of off and on for the next few years until I finally finished it in 2019.
It's not a long trip, is it, from Douglas Adams and Joseph Heller and so on to Jack Kerouac? Were you always a Kerouac fan?
Believe it or not, I was not. I'm even the president of the organization. I am not a Jack Kerouac fan. I have a particular writing style, and he is the complete opposite of my style. And so I could never get into it the way other people have. And I've met a lot of fans, and they are true Kerouac fans. And they've read all of his books more than once, and I've read, I think, 3 of them. And I just get lost in, and not in a good lost, but just kind of get stuck in his writing style, his stream of consciousness.
And Bert, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but as much as Jack Kerouac used to type on a scroll of paper, Erik only types on little slips of paper.
Exactly. I steal receipt rolls from stores. And
Really?
No, not really.
No. I like that. That would be very eccentric. Well, Vladimir Nabokov wrote virtually all of his books on index cards, and he just loved that idea. And in fact, his wife could drive him around wherever they went from place to place, and he would just have some index cards and a pencil and a little board to lean on, and he'd write in the car.
Yeah, I do carry a notebook, and in the past I used to carry index cards for just that reason. You never know when an idea is going to come, and it's sometimes faster to write 2 words in your notebook than it is to pull out your phone and type yourself an email message. So I still favor the old pen and paper.
So if you weren't a big fan of Kerouac, I take it's the atmosphere, it's the institute, it's the writing environment that drew you to the Kerouac project?
It sort of is. It's a funny story about how I actually got in. We were in Orlando for a visit, visiting from Indianapolis, and I was sitting in a coffee shop in the College Park neighborhood near downtown Orlando, and I saw a friend post on Facebook that she was going to be doing a reading at the Kerouac House in Orlando, and I thought, I'm going to miss it. It happens the day I leave, so I won't see it. And then I thought, wait a second, there's a Kerouac House, and it's here in Orlando? And so I Googled it, and I saw that I was sitting like 5 blocks from it. And so I thought, oh, great, I'm gonna see if I can visit. And so I emailed them, can I come visit today? And I get an email back in 10 minutes and it says, absolutely not. This is a private residence. We have writers who visit here, but it's essentially their home for 3 months. You can't just come in. It's not like a museum. The only way you can see it is if you get a residency. And so I thought, well, I'll do that. And so I pulled out the first chapter of my novel and I applied. And I sort of applied in the way that you buy a lottery ticket when you find $1 in your pocket. It's like, you know what, I'll just do it. I'm not going to win, but what if I did win? And so I applied, and Memorial Day Sunday, I get this email that says, congratulations, you're going to be the Spring 2016 Writer in Residence. And my first thought was, oh, they must have had 4 people apply. And so then I went back and I checked the page to see who all the other writers were, and I saw that we had alternates. So there were 8 people who applied, and I thought, oh, I won the coin toss. And so then when we moved to Orlando and I went to an event at the Kerouac House, I explained that to the vice president, and he said, oh, no, we had 300 people from all around the world apply for this thing. And I thought, oh, crap, they think I can do this. They think I'm a good writer, and they think I can write a book, and I'm in trouble, and they're going to find out I'm a fraud. And I got the worst case of imposter syndrome.
Oh.
And I thought they're going to find out who I am and the kind of stuff I write, because I'd been a newspaper humor columnist for 20 years by that point. And I thought they're gonna see that I'm not a serious writer, I'm a humor writer, and they're gonna kick me out. And so then I went home again and I looked at the page and paid particular attention to who the other writers were, and there listed are all their accomplishments, and it's like MFA, writes fart jokes on the internet, MFA, and I thought, I'm in so much trouble. And so I worked when I had that time. I worked really hard because on the novel, because if they ever showed up and say, we made a mistake, I wanted to say, no, look, I've been working. I haven't wasted this time that you gave me. And they assured me that, no, we did intend for you to be here. We make a judgment based solely on the submission, and it was good, and so you're supposed to be here. But I still, even as a president of the organization now, I still feel like I tricked them some days. It's...
Well, they're not going to come anytime soon to get the key back, I don't think.
No. Especially since I know the combination.
Oh, that's right. But let me ask you a question. Did you apply at the coffee shop? I mean, were you just sitting there saying, well, wait a minute now, I've got my computer right here, I'll pull a chapter. How long did it take you to actually apply?
I did. It took a few minutes. I had the chapter already done. They wanted an artist statement. I just banged one out in like 5 minutes, and used my credit card to process the payment, and that was it. And I've known artists who they take days to write that artist statement, and I feel bad telling them, well, I just kind of jerked around and spit something out. And the look on their faces when they hear that, because it's like they work so hard on this and they take their craft so seriously, and I just kind of waltzed in and said, here.
Yeah. Well, if somebody asks you, what's the secret, Erik, to getting into the Kerouac operation, you could say, a double chai latte really worked well for me.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, if anything, Erik, you proved that you belong there, with the ability to do something on the fly like that it's second nature. So well done.
Yeah, and honestly, it's because I write all the time. I always liken it to being a lumberjack who plays baseball on the weekends. If you're always swinging the axe every day, and that's your chance to perfect your batting swing. And so on the weekend, you've had 40 hours of practice, whereas your teammates only get to hit a couple of times a week for an hour a day. And so doing it all the time, writing all the time, really makes it a lot easier to just whip something out that is better than most people's first drafts.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to get into a log rolling contest between second and third base, I mean, you've got them beat immediately.
Exactly, yeah.
do you find what you're reading impinges on your writing, or are there certain authors you avoid reading while you're writing because the styles are infectious, or does all of that stuff not trouble you?
It did at first. When I first started writing my newspaper humor column, I had to stop reading Dave Barry because my style was matching his pretty closely, and I think that was just the influence. And he would say something, and so I would try to say a variation of it. And I always had to make sure not to plagiarize, but it's still, my dad said, you sound an awful lot like Dave Barry, and so I had to stop reading Dave Barry. But otherwise, ever since then, as I got more confident and developed my own style, then I could start reading whomever I wanted, and it didn't affect me. I might see a technique that I wanted to try. Like Ernest Hemingway is famous for not using adverbs. And so years and years ago, I made that a practice. And so I would see other things like that where I'd think, I'm going to try that. And so then in whatever I was writing, I would do that, even if it was like a client's blog article that I was writing for him, or I was writing an email newsletter, or just emails for people. I would practice that technique all the time rather than just waiting for special private writing time. And so that's how I've been able to build my voice by just downright stealing from other authors.
Well, how did you become the leader of the Kerouac operation there? What was the path from resident writer to administrator? So we had moved to Orlando by the time my residency started. Like, we moved down in September 2015, and my residency started in 2016. And when I was done, I thought I'd really like to continue to be a part of this organization. But, they've only seen me for 3 months. They don't know me that well. I'm going to have to volunteer and make myself visible, so maybe someday they'll recognize me on sight and they'll remember my name, and when I can ask them, could I be a part of the board, they might think about saying yes. And it was less than a month after my residency ended that I get a call from Jeff and Jana Benj, who were the vice president and the president of the Kerouac House. And they said, hey, meet us for coffee. And so we did. And I thought, we're going to debrief about my time there. And they said, we want you to join the board. And I was like, what, really? That was easy. And so I joined the board and served on it from summer 2016 until last November, when they announced that they were going to step down. And would anybody like to step up? And I knew we were going to undergo a major renovation and capital campaign. And because I've got years of experience as an entrepreneur and running a business, I thought I've got the skills and the background to be able to run something like this. And so when they looked for somebody to step into it, I said I would do it. And so that's how I became the president. Amazing. I know we're a long way from Sherlock Holmes. We need to get back to Sherlock Holmes, but I'm just curious. So you say that there's renovation. I mean, what's the nickel summary of what Kerouac House needs? Is it a building that just needs, a new roof, or are there more? Is there an endowment? I'm just curious what the operation requires.
So the house itself is 103 years old. It's a Sears and Roebuck kit house. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's just a 100-year-old house, and all the things that you would expect in a 100-year-old house. It was built on piers, not on a foundation wall, and so those piers have settled over the years. We need to stabilize that. We've got some of the floor, the vinyl in the back. It was built with vinyl tiles, and those are cracking and breaking because they're just getting brittle. We'd like to redo the kitchen. The roof, we actually got a new roof a few years ago, but we just have to kind of keep a 100-year-old house going for another 100 years. And so we're looking at not just how do we fix this spot in the wall, but how do we keep that from ever becoming a spot again. So we're looking at what can keep this house around for the next 100 years.
That's a lot to mind, in addition to continuing writing and whatever other day job happens to keep you occupied from time to time. So, but I do want to bring us back to Sherlock Holmes. I'm going to do it in 3 fell swoops here, because one is not enough. There is a blog out there called the Daily Beat blog by Rick Dale, and it's subtitled The Beat Handbook: 100 Days of Kerouactions. And April 29th, 2019, he has an entry, Today in History, Jack Kerouac and Sherlock Holmes. And he notes that Kerouac had an essay called The Origins of the Beat Generation, and he expounds upon what the Beat Generation goes back to. And among other things, he says, quote, "To dear old Basil Rathbone looking for the Hound of the Baskervilles, a dog as big as the gray wolf who will destroy Odin. To dear old bleary Dr. Watson with a brandy in his hand." So.
Yeah, I found that just as we were starting to earlier when we were talking and wondering if there was a connection. So there is a connection between Jack and Sherlock.
And the second is he looks at a book called Character Key to Kerouac's Duluo's Legend by Dave Moore. And he says Dean Moriarty in On the Road represents real-life Neil Cassidy. But why did Jack use the pseudonym Dean Moriarty? And he claims it was a combination of James Dean and, of course, Professor Moriarty.
Interesting.
So, and then finally, there was a book. I don't know what year this was written. Bert, you may remember. It's a collection of pastiches called Resurrected Holmes by Marvin Kaye. Marvin Kaye was the editor. And one of the stories in there was written by Richard Lupoff, who was commissioned by Kaye for this book to write a Holmes story as if he were Jack Kerouac.
We'll have to give that a look. It's from 1997.
97. Okay, I think I have the book somewhere on my shelf. So if I can track that down, I will take a look at it. We're going to pause here a moment for a quick word from our sponsor. Well, it is autumn, and the autumnal gales have blown in yet more works from Sherlockian authors at MX Publishing. New works include books like The Medical Casebook of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson by Nick Howell, A Study in Statecraft by Orlando Pearson, and Sherlock Holmes, The Devil's Disciples by Richard T. Ryan. There are literally dozens upon dozens of books to choose from that were released in 2023 alone. And if you take a look at all of the new books that are coming, they are laid out by week, even in some case by the day, in the new arrivals at MX Publishing. Whether it's scholarship, pastiche, or other survey work, your need will be answered in the Sherlockian book world at mxpublishing.com. Make sure you check them out today and tell them IHOSE sent you. So, as we know, a number of prominent early Sherlockians were also columnists. I'm thinking, of course, of Vincent Sterrett in his Books Alive column in the Chicago Tribune. I think it was the Tribune. And Christopher Morley, of course, he had a regular column in the Saturday Review of Literature. There were probably some other columnists too. Charles Hantz, he was an AP editor, but he had a regular column as well. Talk to us a little bit, Erik, about the regularity, the cadence of doing a column, and more importantly, and this is, I think, where I have some particular interest, what it's like or the challenges of writing a humor column, because that doesn't come naturally to everyone.
Yeah, well, it is difficult, but I've done it long enough that I've got my routine and my habit, and I know what I need to do. So like every Thursday night is column night. And as a family, we don't do anything like going out or leaving on a Thursday night because that's column night. If I know that we are going to be gone for a week, let's say, I'll write something in advance, but that is so rare I can count on both hands the number of times I have had a column done before Thursday, let alone getting it done on time. And so generally at 8 o'clock every night, I start on the writing, and I'll write the first draft, and I'll wait a couple hours, and I'll revise it, and I'll wait a couple hours, and around 12:30 or 1, I'm putting the final polish on and then sending it out. So that always happens. I've gotten, in the last couple years, I've gotten more into the habit of having maybe the first draft written Thursday morning. And that certainly helped improve my writing quite a bit. But then getting the humor in there, that becomes just another muscle that writers use. There are some people who are good at tear-jerking drama, or they are good at spinning fantastic yarns in science fiction and fantasy, and other people are good at poetry. And it just so happened that I focused a lot on humor and learning, about the processes of humor and what are some of the psychological theories behind it. And so when I write something, I don't think, I'm going to use surprise here, or I'm going to use recognition here, but I can at least, when I put something in, it feels almost instinctual, and then I can go back and say, that was this technique. But just having the name for those tools in the toolbox helped me write those things. But then it becomes a question of, when I think of a topic, if I can think of 3 or 4 jokes immediately, that's a topic I'm going to keep. But if it's something where I only get one, or I don't get any, nothing comes to mind immediately, then I abandon the idea. And so sometimes I'll keep a notebook of ideas and things I want to work on, and other times, like last week, it was about 6 o'clock in the evening, and I didn't even have a topic to write about. And I was scouring different weird news websites from like the AP and NPR and the CBC. They all have their own weird news stories and just that special category on their website. And so I'll look for things like that, or I'll think of something that I did in the past, or I'll make up a story. I have a character that about every 2 months I will have a conversation with him at some bar or some restaurant. His name's Carl the Curmudgeon, and we will sit and talk about a topic. And so if I've got a thin topic idea that I might want to write about, but I don't have a lot of good jokes about, I'll talk to Carl about it, and then the humor kind of comes out of there. So I'm always looking for some kind of new idea, and then if I'm fortunate, by Monday or even Tuesday, if I've got a topic, I can start writing it in my head and coming up with some of the jokes, so that by the time I sit down to my laptop to start writing, everything comes out, and I've got 750 words in about 15 minutes.
Interesting. And your column is distributed to newspapers in Indiana, is that right?
Yes, I'm self-syndicated in 7 different newspapers in Indiana, 2 in northern Indiana, and 5 in central Indiana.
Have you been much affected by the general shrinkage in local news and local newspapers?
I'm fortunate in that I have not, mostly because I still do it for free or for very, very cheap. And so the editors are not getting the kind of content that they need at such a low rate. I just do it because I love it. And I'm fortunate to make $5 a week from it from one paper. I send them 1 invoice a year. And so in that sense, if they've got to run a story that they pay a stringer $50 or $100 for, or they get a column from me for $5 or even for free, they'll go with me. Fortunately, this is not a way that I try to make money, so I'm happy to give it to them for whatever they're willing to pay.
Well, I've seen your stuff too, Erik, and I think you're worth every penny.
Thank you very much. Still a bargain at twice the price.
So, obviously, where we appreciate your humor the most, or I should say where people from these parts are most familiar with your humor, comes from your responses to the Canonical Couplet, a little quiz that we do every episode where we give 2 lines of poetry, and then we typically put Bert to the task of figuring out what the Sherlock Holmes story actually is. And I think you've elevated it to a level of art that I don't think we were expecting around here.
Well, thank you.
What made you decide to start throwing your hat in the ring that way?
I actually did it because I always loved Bert's guesses at the stories, and one time when I submitted, I thought, well, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to do something funny. It'll be a laugh for Scott and Bert. But then you read it, and I thought, oh, that felt nice. I'm going to do that again. And sure enough, you read that one again, and so I was hooked. I thought, well, I have to do something funny every time. And so for me, it's not even participating in the contest. It's writing something funny. That's my whole aim. I could not care less if I won. It's the fact that I got to send in something funny that you read on the air. That doesn't mean I don't want to win. It just means that that's not my priority.
Well, you've become a fixture around these parts, much like the Persian slipper and the Gasogene have around 221B Baker Street. I think it feels like there's something missing if we don't have an Erik Deckers Canonical Couplet entry to...
And I always feel bad when I miss.
Been very, very few and far between.
Like I've texted you apologizing. I'm so sorry. I failed you.
Well, as long as it's not on Thursday nights, you're in good shape.
Yeah, exactly. You can't conflict.
Yeah. Have you had any experience with humor in Sherlock Holmes stories? Or let me put this a different way. Have you had any experience reading Sherlock Holmes parodies or humor or satire type pieces?
I've read a few. Some of them were good. I can't remember. There was one. I can't remember the name, but I think Gahan Wilson wrote the cover, and it was a pastiche. It wasn't even a proper pastiche. It was a parody of like a duck. There was a duck on there, like an evil duck, and the Holmes character and the Watson character, whatever their names were trying to solve this crime. And it was about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the book that I finally realized, oh, this is Sherlock Holmes. And I unfortunately gave the book away when we moved down here, and I can't remember the name of it, but I'd like to read that again. It was a green edge with a black cover with cartoon characters.
Yeah, everybody's favorite duck.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, by Gan Wilson. And it looks like Moriarty and Fu Manchu are on the cover with a duck in Sherlockian garb.
I think that was it.
Yeah, Professor, the fiendishly brilliant British Napoleon of crime, and the Mandarin, the cruelly diabolical Chinese mastermind, and Spectrobert, the black-heartedly crafty French rogue, meet in the Dungeon of Horror at Madame Grimaud's Wax Museum. It leads the police department being baffled, the FBI bewildered, and the CIA being entirely up a tree. What deviltry are they plotting? What fate hangs in the balance? How can the forces of justice stymie their plans? Above all, what's their connection with the famed cartoonist Art Waldo's universally adored creation, Quacky the Lucky Duck?
That's the one.
There you go. Unfortunately, our interview cuts short right there. We went on to talk with Erik about a number of other things, but I guess I couldn't tell the difference between the mute button and the record button. And just so you know what you're missing, we talked more about humor. Specifically, we talked about humor in the movies. We spent some time on Holmes and Watson, which Erik said was one of his favorites, and he justified it by describing exactly how bad it was and being one of those comedies that is almost poking fun at itself because it's so bad. But we also introduced Erik to Without a Clue, which he had not seen before, so that was a ray of sunshine there. The other thing we mentioned, and something that everyone who's listening should be looking forward to, and that is Erik's first appearance in the Baker Street Journal. He is looking at something on a scholarly level rather than from a perspective of humor. He's looking at what the prices of items in 1895 could be compared to today. So looking at the purchase value of something that Sherlock Holmes or one of his clients would have purchased in that era. He said that he and Baker Street Journal editor Dan Andriacco went back and forth on it and eventually landed on something that he thinks will be delightful and informative all at once. So, Erik, we are looking forward to that. And again, apologies for cutting this short.
Erik is the only writer that I have ever spoken to. Not that I'm a great authority on speaking to writers, but over the course, of my life, I've certainly spoken to, 50 or so people who've been professional writers, but he's the only one who has this, why not, let's do it now kind of attitude. It's just great.
Well, it's infectious. And I think when you see the abandon with which Erik approaches his work, and it's coupled with, and we were talking about this kind of backstage before, it's coupled with this notion that he makes it look easy or he makes it look fun. And the fact is there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes. Whether you're producing a podcast or producing a weekly column or whatever it happens to be, people see the finished product. They see how much fun you're having with it, which makes them want to have fun with it as well. But it also makes them think that, the creation process just must have been a blast. And it doesn't always work out like that.
The first Sherlock Holmes parody was probably written in 1896, The Field Bazaar, by Arthur Conan Doyle himself. He knew laughing was good for you. That's why the Wessex Press continues the tradition with The True Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Terence Faherty. It's a rare collection of Watson's early first drafts of the cases of Sherlock Holmes that will show you the truth behind the engineer's thumb and the strange insanity of General Waxbutton. Learn the actual facts behind the adventure of the notorious parasol chaser, and astonish your friends when you tell them the man with the twisted lip actually struck it big as a part-time bustle fitter. 7 of these great stories have been published in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, and 4 appear here for the very first time in this very first collection. Now is the perfect time for a comfortable chair and a long laugh. Get The True Adventures of Sherlock Holmes at wessexpress.com today.
Oh, well, you know what that means. That's right. It means it's time for America's favorite Sherlockian quiz show, Canonical Couplets, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and we ask you to give us the Sherlock Holmes story that we were referring to. Now, if you recall, when we were around here the last time, we gave you this clue. The secret rigmarole directly beckoned to legal assets of King Charles II. Bert, do you know which Sherlock Holmes story we're talking about?
Yes, of course I do. That is one of the great tales of the canon. It's the story of the United States Senator, his Brazilian wife, and the murderous dentist. It's the case Watson called The Problem of Sore Bridge.
Boy, oh boy. I'm afraid you're incorrect. How did we ever guess that this was coming? No.
What?
I know. No, the key there was King Charles II. He appeared in the Musgrave Ritual.
Oh, I should have said that was the one about the discovery of the lost recipe for the spicy Old English condiment. That was the mustard victual.
Oh, pardon me. Would you have any correct answers?
No, but I've got some correction fluid. Wait a minute. Let me pour another glass of that.
Please stick that directly into your veins. Well, as I look over all of our entries, well, this is ironic. We don't have an entry from Erik.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Oh, well, thank goodness tonight isn't Thursday. Maybe it'll get in before the deadline. We'll see.
Yes.
But in the meantime, we did get a number of correct answers from a number of our listeners, but we do have a number of correct entries here. So I'm going to have to pull out the big prize wheel and give it a spin. Okay, it's going around and landing on number 25, number 25, and that looks like it is Kimberly Gallegos. All right, Kim, thank you so much. She writes in that she gave us the Adventure of the Musgrave Ritual and says, thank you very much for your wonderful programs. They've become my favorite podcasts, and I actually squealed with joy when the last one became available. Thank you very much for all that you do. Well, that was nice.
Thank you. That's a lovely note. Thank
you. It is. It's nice to know that we're adding some value to the world of people out there. Did I ever tell you that joke that Groucho Marx told? He's an older Groucho Marx, and he said, I was in an elevator in Toronto, and a priest gets in the elevator with me. And,
yes.
And he says, oh,
I know,
Mr. Marx, thank you. I'd like to thank you for all the joy you've put into this world. And I said, well, thank you, Father. I'd like to thank you for all the joy you've taken out of this world.
Well, I was thinking of another Groucho story because he told, it's one I think he felt a little badly about, but but he was in an elevator with the priest, and the priest said to him, Groucho, I have to tell you, I love your humor, and my mother loves your humor too. And he said, gee, I didn't know you fellas had mothers.
I think that was the same one. That was the precursor to it. I always thought it was Immaculate Conception.
That's right.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're not here to talk about Groucho or his jokes. We are here to finish up the canonical couplet. We do have another entry for you to put your brain to the test with in these 2 weeks between episodes. So we're going to give you the clue, and you need to get to work. Here we go. Those county magnates caused a lot of worry when Holmes went down to a holiday in Surrey. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you're among all of the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. All right, we have some lovely merch from the Sherlock, the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere vaults. Always a good place to spend time. Well, Bert, between now and the end of the month, I believe it is the American holiday of Thanksgiving.
Yes, it certainly is. And I give thanks for our listeners and for the joy of Sherlock Holmes and for all these years of doing this with you.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Well, we do have the best listeners on the planet, and it is a joy to do the show, although it doesn't come without its headaches from time to time, but this is why we do it. We are artistes. We struggle for our art.
How is Art, anyway? He never calls me back.
Well, he's up a wall right now. And it's
He's just hanging around.
hanging around, yeah. Well, before things get any worse with us, we're going to be back here next time with a wonderful guest who's going to be talking with us about some of the goings-on in the events side of Sherlock Holmes, someone you will not want to miss. So make sure you have subscribed to the show wherever you get podcasts, or sign up for our email updates at ihearofsherlock.com. Until then, I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving.
And I am already stuffed. I'm Burt Wolder.
And together, we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.